It should be no surprise that much of what is contained in the second budget proposal mirrors the core tenets of our first proposal. The state must live within its means. We cannot spend more than we take in. That's why, when revenue came in lower than expected in April, we went back to the table to redraft our budget proposal. The proposal I present today cuts general fund expenditures an additional $241 million and other funds by $363 million in fiscal year 18 as compared to the cuts we proposed in February. These reductions also mark a general fund expenditure decrease over the prior year's appropriation. This session, the best outcome we can achieve for the people of the state is to adopt a responsible, balanced budget that does not rely heavily on new or increased taxes. My revised proposal builds on much of what I proposed in February, with some minor adjustments to some new proposals, incorporating proposals from other budgets presented to date, and by making some significant spending changes. The proposal maintains our commitment to fully funding our pension obligations and commits billions of dollars to the Medicaid program, municipal aid, and ECS. I also want to point out that this proposal stabilizes the Special Transportation Fund. Though it cuts spending by $15 million in fiscal 2018, we incorporate the Republicans' proposal to transfer sales tax on new vehicles to the STF starting in fiscal year 2019, thereby extending the solvency of the fund until 2022. Over the last several years, we have asked state agencies to do more with less. They have delivered on that task, and they will continue to realize efficiencies. But we must acknowledge that the state agencies will need to start doing less with less. It's nearly impossible to cut hundreds of millions of dollars of expenditures year after year and not expect change in state services. As I said in my address to the legislature earlier this year, the reality is that the state does not have the resources to continue to provide the same level of aid to local governments. This continues to be true, and even more so now, given that revenue receipts came in at a lower rate than projected. To be clear, shrinking revenue does not mean that we abandon our strongly held principles of fairness and interconnectedness. My budget still answers the urgent call for a more equitable and transparent school funding formula, for instance. It still provides a lifeline to struggling cities and towns, making sure that the hubs to our regional economies don't falter, and this assistance must come with increased oversight on how those dollars are spent. My recalibrated proposal does not increase either the income tax or the sales tax rates. With that said, just like my original proposal, it does adjust some tax rates. Specifically, it raises $70 million in revenue by eliminating the sales tax exemption on non-prescription drugs and increases the conveyance tax on home values in excess of $800,000. The budget proposal I am releasing today also continues to reflect the need for labor to be partners in the solution. The proposal continues to assume that we will achieve $700 million in savings in fiscal year 18 through a new agreement with CBAC and by other means if necessary. Make no mistake, this is a challenging budget that contains many difficult decisions, several of which we wished we didn't have to make. But the truth is the new economic reality demands this of us. The state can only support as many grants and programs as our available resources allow. We cannot spend or distribute more funds than we take in. The proposal achieves balance responsibly, but we refuse to compound the poor fiscal decisions of previous administrations and we will not continue to kick the can down the road. We will not saddle future generations with unnecessary debt because state leaders lack the fortitude to make the hard choices. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Governor, why not assume more labor saving as the problem has increased since you proposed your budget recommendation?
It's a fair question. I think the $700 million number is a reasonable number, one that I remain hopeful that we can reach, but quite frankly, we need to reach it in the coming days, not weeks, and everything remains on the table.
Do you think that you might exceed that target?
You know, again, our agreements need to be reached in a matter of days, not weeks. After either we reach an agreement or we don't reach an agreement, we'll have to consider other steps.
Governor, what did you consider when you decided on the changes to the revenue? Why not
I don't support a sugary beverage tax, that's why.
And then why the changes, would those have the least impact?
I mean, I think that, you know, at about $18 million, if I remember correctly, the over-the-counter drugs, which we had some experience with and therefore can reasonably predict what it would, better predict what it would bring in, was a reasonable one to do. Quite frankly, most people assume they're paying a tax on those things. It didn't seem disruptive, and we have experience in collecting it. With respect to values over $800,000, that seemed like a reasonable compromise, particularly in light of the fact that I believe this budget will bring our income tax policy in line with surrounding states, and will make additional changes to the estate tax. So I thought it was a reasonable trade-off.
Do you expect the municipalities to be able to absorb this increase in addition to what you proposed in February?
Yes.
Without increasing property tax?
Listen, I don't run their cities. I know when I ran a city for 14 years, when I left, the workforce was 10% smaller than when I became mayor. People have to manage their budgets.
Are you telling them to reduce it?
No, I'm just saying that they have to manage their budgets. I don't get to manage their budgets. They have to manage their budgets.
Do you think any city or town can do it without increasing property taxes?
Sure, I do.
Governor, Mayor Cronin and the Hartford delegation have said the challenge to get votes to help Hartford will be if too many towns don't come out ahead. How are you going to, given the cuts you got to recommend, how are you going to get people to support assisting Hartford when their communities might lose ground?
You know, I think that there's a world of difference between a municipality that has an effective tax rate of 70 mils to one that has 9 mils. That's what I think.
On the cities and towns, they've called for...
Yeah, let me go a little bit further. If you look at the data, our wealthiest communities have per capita tax bases of between $600,000 and $700,000, almost $800,000, and our poorest communities have per capita tax bases of $45,000. There's a world of difference between those communities, and quite frankly, we can't afford to force communities into bankruptcy. I think that would be very detrimental to the state overall, and very detrimental to our job growth prospects. I'm going to go back to Max.
Thank you. On the removing the sales tax exemption on non-prescription drugs, that was one of many different sales tax exemptions that CCM was calling for to obviously get more money. But in addition to that, would you also be open to things like opening up collective bargaining across town lines and things like that if they wanted to combine services? Would you be open to that like an implementer?
Listen, I wouldn't say no to things that I haven't considered, so I didn't consider those actively in this budget. And why did they want the state to take? Why did they want the state to take in more money?
Oh.
Why, Max?
I don't work for CCM.
It was because they wanted more money.
Unless they offered me a job recently, I'm not aware of it. But no, but are there any other sales tax exemptions that you're looking at besides the prescription drug?
If we had been, they'd be in the budget.
Governor, what makes you think that towns and cities will go for, or legislators who represent 187 legislators who represent 169 towns and cities will still go for your teacher pension proposal?
Because we take the step of capping their exposure to the cost. And quite frankly, effectively capping it to what that share would be. And so it stays at $400 million until the, what's the right terminology, Ben? I'm sorry.
Until the legislature decides
I'm sorry?
otherwise.
The normal cost.
Actually, until the legislature decides otherwise, if you would do that, right? I mean, you say you cap it at $400 million, it would just take a public act and the signature of the governor to increase that. That's true
Well,
today.
that's true today. It's true any day, right?
Okay.
So what is the figure, or maybe Ben knows the answer if you don't, what's the total amount of increased taxes between the conveyance tax increase on high-end homes and the elimination of
The high-end homes would bring in around 50-something, low 50s, we estimate, and the exemption would be about 18, I think.
About what?
About 18, yeah.
Oh, 18.
Can you talk about how your proposal will affect PCS funding, or in your previous proposal, lots of towns got zero, and the cities got one?
We'll leave Ben behind, and you can, pick the bones, all right?
I mean, people call it a Robin Hood for cities and towns.
You know what, I understand you have to ask questions, so go back and ask them, their answers are raise taxes to give them more money. And I think I've made it abundantly clear that this cannot be a revenue-driven discussion, that we need to make changes. I've cautioned people for a period of time. We have, in fact, made changes that we should be proud of. But the Great Recession of 2008, I think, substantially changed our economy, and we need to continue the process of adjusting to that. At the same time, we need to fund our long-term obligations, which weren't funded, and one of which is, quite frankly, to teachers. And we need to find a way to move in that direction.
Why hit high-end real estate transactions when we're told already they're suffering, especially downstate?
What do you think we should hit? Do you think we should hit low-end real estate transactions?
The question is, why did you pick that?
Because, as I said, we're making substantial adjustments in our income tax policy and our estate policy in this budget. So I think it was a fair trade-off, quite frankly. And how many people do you know who own houses substantially in excess of $800,000?
Well, you're living in one right now.
Yeah, it hasn't been on the market in a while. But I mean, listen. This is not a revenue-driven budget.
Right.
It's about $70 million that we've added, and it seemed like a reasonable.
Can you explain what the adjustments are in the income tax that you're referring to? Because I think I missed that.
The elimination of the reduction of the earned income tax credit and the elimination of the property tax credit remain in our.
That remains. Okay.
So you put the property tax credit back in?
No.
No, we
Remains out.
never took it out.
It remains out.
Oh, remains out. Oh, sorry.
Remains out.
On the
Well, what about
ECS
the state?
formula, could you talk a little bit about, there was a lot of towns who were really upset that they were being zeroed out, and this budget would make even more towns zeroed out. I guess I'm just trying to understand what your thinking was behind that, of getting it through a suburban legislature.
My thinking is that the revenue deteriorated further, so we had to make changes.
And what about the state parks? I mean, and can we afford to have those on autopilot?
I don't know what you mean by autopilot. I think that for instance, many of those state parks operate that way, operate without direct supervision for substantial portions of the year.
Are there any changes to the citizens' election fund?
No, not that I'm aware of.
People have proposed waiving that.
Because I believe it's a good system, so and should be supported.
Governor, do you agree with Fitch Ratings' assessment of the current state fiscal situation and also that lowering the state bond rating?
Well, I mean, I think that we hope to get to stability, and it was interesting that there was a diminishment, but also the finding of stability, and that's going to be, I think, tested in the coming days through the legislative process. So I hope that we are finding stability. Certainly trying to lead us to that stability, but we need to find it in the coming days, hopefully coming days, both with respect to our agreements with labor, but also ultimately producing a budget.
What is the latest on the layoffs?
I'll let you follow up.
I was going to say, do you feel Fitch reacted prematurely to this?
Listen, I say this, I don't bay at the moon anymore. There are things you can change and things you can't change. I do think that what has happened in the bond rating business is the things that they tolerated for a very long period of time, such as very high assumed rates of return of investment and states not funding their obligations, and they stood by allowing that to happen for generations. They now realize was a mistake. It was a mistake. It was a mistake for the state to have done it. It was a mistake for the bond rating agencies to have turned their head and looked the other way, or just assume that a community's wealth or a state's wealth would overwhelm that obligation in the long run. In a post-2008 United States, we are a slow-growth economy. Technology may be a contributor to that as well. And we have to take those factors into consideration. That's one reason why we've gone from, I think it was either an 8.5% expected rate of return or 8.25 I'll get you the final number, down to a 6.90, which put us in the 16 percentile, lowest percentile with respect to the assumed rate of return. I thought that was an important thing to do. Imagine if we hadn't done that already. Now, by the way, I think we also need to look at the other systems to make those kinds of adjustments to put our house in order on a long-term basis.
Are layoff notices going out today and the rest of the week? What is the latest on layoffs?
So I'm going to answer this the last time. Layout notices are going to continue to go out. They started last week, as I told you. We'll give you a weekly update. I think we're going to get you a weekly update sometime today. And of course, they're going to continue to go out. And they have to continue to go out. As you well know and have reported in your own newspaper, there are statutory and or contractual relationships that have to be honored for us to be in a position to make the changes that we may have to make.
Governor, what about the
You're getting a lot today.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What about the shift from CSSD to DCF? Why are we taking all the children?
Because I think, I believe we can do it more cost effectively, and quite frankly, it's a function of executive branch of government, not the judiciary.
Would you consider this a bare bones budget?
You know, I thought the last budget was bare bones. So, you know, this is a budget that is reflective of the current economic environment. And, you know, it doesn't show up, but I'll caution you, a great number of states had shortfalls in expected income in April. We're not, by no means are we the exception. And in fact, in our region, every state was included. So.
Who else goes up besides Hartford?
I don't, again, you can have Ben for a little bit longer.
If you were the mayor of a city or a town right now and you knew that there was going to be this much less money, what would you do?
You know, I would do what I'm asking, you know, state employees to do, and that is to be part of the answer.
What does that mean? Does that mean they should?
Max, I don't run those places.
No,
I gave you a fair answer. I think that everybody has to be part of the solution. But for folks to expect that the state can hold everybody harmless from anything at the same time they deal with a new economic reality is on its face unreasonable. And when we continue to assume that that's going to happen, we send a very dangerous message to outsiders who look at us. You know, the idea that we're going to take $5.2 billion and isolate that from any consideration, and we're going to take all the money that we give to hospitals in support of Medicaid and our own employee, and we're going to take that off. So now we're up about $6.6 billion. And then, of course, we can't affect what the federal government gives us in a negative, we're not going to affect it in a negative way. So that takes those programs off. All of a sudden, you're making adjustments to reflect an economic reality of a slow growth economy, and you're trying to make it on fewer and fewer portions of the budget. That equation can't apply any longer.
Governor, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis reported last week that the Connecticut economy, or the state's gross domestic product, grew by 1% in 2016. Were you expecting to see a larger increase? What's your reaction?
Well, what was interesting about that is it showed that the first quarter shrank by 0.9%. So if you then look at the remaining 3 quarters of the year, our growth was very much in alignment with most of the rest of the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. Having said that, this is a number that gets restated for up to 3 years and has frequently been restated upwards and has on a couple of occasions been restated downwards. But if you do an analysis of the quarterly, you get a feel, I think, better for where we are today.
Are you encouraged by the 2% increase in the final quarter of 2016?
I'm always encouraged with more growth than I am with lower growth.
Top 10 in the fourth quarter. Governor.
Thank you for noting that. Could you put that in a headline?
Number 10. We're number 10.
Okay.
Governor, if you would not trade off an expansion of or a reduction of exemptions in the property in the sales tax for giving more money to towns, would you trade it off for getting this budget passed? because it may come to that. Just, you're already going down the route of eliminating exemptions. There are obviously, as you know, some 3 or 4 billion out there.
Republicans and Democrats can send me a budget anytime.
Governor, do you have any reaction to the move by Jeff Sessions to increase sentencing, mandatory sentencing for drug offenders? That seems to go counter to what you and even Republican governors and legislatures have been doing in this country.
Well, just a few moments ago, Paul Ryan came out against that as well. Now, I have almost never agreed with anything that Paul Ryan had to say about anything, including his selection of favorite books. But on this, I agree with Paul Ryan.
Why is that?
Because I think it's wrong-minded. I think it's important to have crimes, have the sentence for crimes commensurate with the nature of the crime committed. And for instance, we have a history in the United States of having treated crack cocaine differently than granulated or powdered cocaine. Let there be no doubt that difference in policy had as much to do with urban versus non-urban and racially mixed communities versus non-racially mixed communities. We have a long history of making the wrong decision on sentencing, and when we're aware of that, we need to address it, which Connecticut itself has done in the last couple of years.
The State Elections Enforcement Commission is expected to review a draft decision on Mayor Ganem's request for public financing. Do you have a view on that?
I'll think about it. Ask it again
So a
some
second
other
chance is a
time.
second chance.
But you're not getting one today. All right, one more.
How many of your state employees will there be if this budget comes to pass compared to what we have now?
You know, I think there is an immediate number, and then there's a long-term number. And I don't have that number for you. If there is an absence of an agreement with labor in the coming days, then it will be a nearly impossible situation for them and for us. Okay? Thank you very much.